Hello and welcome back to Chillers and Thrillers, the paranormal podcast where I read true encounters with the strange and unexplained. We keep skepticism at the door, and there's no gore or true crime. In this episode, we're going to cover one of my personally most feared paranormal entities, doppelgangers and mimics. The term doppelganger originated from German folklore and stands for double goer. As the tale goes, a doppelganger is a wraith or apparition of a living person, distinguishing it from a typical ghost. There's a belief that seeing your own doppelganger is a bad omen, that misfortune will come to you should you see your spirit double, or that death is imminent. Some people have reported seeing doppelgangers of family members or friends in their homes, when they factually knew these people were elsewhere. In most of the stories I found, the doppelganger does not interact with people, but may sometimes talk to or at a person. In Scandinavian folklore, there are the Vardøger. A Vardøger is considered a spirit predecessor, a spirit that performs a type of reverse déjà vu. It's a spirit that looks like you and performs common actions you do without interacting with others. Then there are the mimics. Although some people believe that doppelgangers and mimics are the same, they are not. In my opinion, mimics are much more sinister. The stories of people who encountered mimics tend to be more unnerving, and they can sometimes be encountered in the wild as well, as many people believe that Skinwalkers can mimic human voices to lure people. I'm not sure why I find the idea of doppelgangers and mimics so unnerving when compared to other paranormal phenomena. Perhaps it's the intention behind the copying. The mimic and the doppelganger are presenting itself as someone or something we trust. But why? What does it gain by this? Let me know your thoughts, but in the meantime, let's get to our stories. The Mimic in the Woods, submitted by user ThoughtNinja. My friend, we'll call him Marv, likes to go solitary camping on occasion, to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He's also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. This took place a few years back. Marv decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a few guns, a hunting rifle and a .45 sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country onto a vast swatch of property owned by a friend of his. He had full permission and the works. This happened close to the Wasatch National Forest in south-central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that. Safe to say it's miles and miles of forest and wilderness. Marv liked to hike in pretty deep and camp at a specific spot he had found a few trips prior. He made his way in and set up camp in his usual small clearing for the night. Skipping ahead a few hours, it was now late afternoon when Marv heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed it was an animal at first and got up from cooking to try to get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise and saw a man approaching through the trees a good many yards away. Marv has previously described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places. He's typically cautious, as more often than not, the people he comes across are armed like him. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up, looking for any ulterior motives, as you can never tell what some folks are up to in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal. He's never really met anyone nefarious other than this situation. So one thing that immediately sets off small alarm bells for him is he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property. And the second thing is, this guy is not dressed for the location at all. Marv said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, sharp blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Marv is miles out in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, roadways, houses, anything really. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location dressed like that, unless they are lost, confused, or hurt. It was early fall, but not quite cool, which is very normal for Louisiana. So there's tons of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects. People aren't going to have most of their skin exposed if they can help it, deep in the woods. So Marv assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need any help or something?" pretty loudly, definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy keeps walking forward, staring directly at him. Marv is starting to get unnerved, and as I said, I know him pretty well, and he's cool as a cucumber in tense situations. Getting more uneasy as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 15 to 20 feet away from Marv now, standing at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy, looking Marv dead in the eyes, speaks and clearly says, "Help me." Marv said he was already starting to actually get worried at this point, because he said the way the guy said this was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying "help me," or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still unmoving, says, "Help me," again. Slightly more emphatic, but really just slightly louder. Marv said this is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. The timbre of the voice was more female, and actually sounded like a recording being played back. And that when the guy spoke, his lips and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It's like he was just opening his mouth, emitting the phrase, and closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" not daring to back up or move whatsoever. The guy, still standing motionless, looking directly at Marv, said, "Help me," again, and repeated the phrase again 3 times slowly, but not louder in volume. "Help me." Marv, now totally unsure of what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy by barking, "All right, you need to go now unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" he continued, loud and firm in tone. The guy didn't miss a beat and just kept going with the "help me's" again and again, and made as if he was going to take another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that he then did the only thing that made sense in the moment, and drew his .45 semi-auto pistol and pointed it at the guy, telling him again, "You need to go. I don't care what you want." The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, and actually started to say the phrase louder, over and over and over again, but not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right given his current predicament. Assuming he was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual, he discharged a round on the ground. Now this is where it gets fully crazy. The guy suddenly stops uttering the phrase, goes silent, and still staring at Marv, does a full backflip somersault backwards into the woods and immediately out of sight. Now I know what you're thinking, because I had and still have the same reaction. That sounds like BS for sure. But Marv gave no indication of falsehood and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Marv said when the guy backflipped away effortlessly, as if he was being pulled back by an unseen tension coil. He described it as completely humanly unnatural and completely out of place. The guy had just appeared and repeated the same phrase over and over, eventually becoming almost frantic before Marv shot at the ground, which caused him or it to flee. Marv said he stood there, focused on the forest where the guy just flipped into. It was like the guy had never even been there. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable fellow and actually stayed in the area for the night before returning with no further incident. He had told me and some other friends about this, of course, and we asked many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like it had heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot, almost like a lure. Marv doesn't know what it wanted, and it didn't give any indication to follow or utter anything else. It immediately reacted to the gunshot, and you know what followed from there. Marv's been back to the property since then with no other strange occurrences. Since the incident, he did do some online research on the whole Kisatchie area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore in the area. not to mention mimics and other similar supposed creatures. A lot of his encounters line up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it, of course. But even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched area of our world that can't be explained. The Friend Who Wasn't There, submitted by user officerblues. I have a group of friends who have been friends pretty much since kindergarten. There's 4 of us, me and 3 more guys. We're all 29-30 at the time of writing, and we were 28-29 at the time this event happened. We are all really close, even though ever since college, we rarely get a chance to meet up. All 4 of us were in long-lasting and steady relationships, either married or the modern equivalent, except for the main subject of the story, who had come out of a pretty messy divorce. This friend, who's named Andy, had been having a really rough time of life. His ex-wife decided to leave him right as his mother was dying of cancer, so it was understandable that we were all a bit worried about him. One of my friends has a pretty nice country house that's far enough away from civilization to allow for a nice weekend retreat every once in a while. And at the start of the story, we had one of those scheduled. The week before, as we were all planning our retreat, Andy decided that he wasn't going to come because he didn't want to be the only one without a significant other for the entire weekend. We all insisted a bit, but we kind of understood the feeling, and since he had another event to go to during the weekend, we left it alone. Still, I wasn't really satisfied with that, as I felt he could really use the change of scenery, so I decided that I'd give him a call Saturday morning right before I left to the country house and offer him a ride and give him one last chance to show up. I called him from the door of my house, and he sounded kind of strange on the phone, like he was sluggish or something. I even joked with him about it, since it was kind of early and I assumed I had woken him up. He didn't laugh or anything, so I thought he was upset. When I offered to pick him up and give him a ride, he simply replied, "Okay." I told him to pack up a change of clothes and meet me in front of his house, and so we were gone. It was me, my wife, and him in the car for a nice 45-minute drive. I started noticing things were off just as he got in the car. He was acting really stupid. I have no other way to put this. He did not get any jokes, had trouble understanding simple questions, and kept replying either with a simple yes or no, or with a really slurred, short phrase at the most. At this point, me and my wife had all reason to be worried about him. We started thinking maybe he'd evolved into some sort of weird depression or started doing drugs. He refused to acknowledge anything was wrong with him, so we simply drove on, hoping maybe he'd open up later on. So we all arrive, and there's food and drinks and video games. And since we were all friends for over 20 years, there were lots of fun to be had. But it quickly became obvious to all of us that Andy wasn't acting right. He wasn't playing any games, wasn't talking at all, and spent most of his time just looking at us or at the outside. He'd have a look of marvel in his face, as if he was watching something really impressive unfolding. As time went on, I noticed he wasn't eating or drinking anything at all. And one of the other guys swears that he kept tabs, and Andy never went to the bathroom at all during the entire stay. We tried to get him to talk, but he'd just give us the exact same response every time. "I'm okay." He ended up winning the patience game, and we left him to his own devices. The night went on, and he sat on a bench outside looking at a stretch of woods near the house. We all stayed indoors talking and stuff, and then decided to go to sleep. Andy said he'd go in soon. He just wanted to chill for a bit outside, and we all let him be. The next morning, late Sunday morning, his bed wasn't made. The sheets were intact on top of it, and Andy was sitting outside in the exact same place we left him, in the exact same position. That was it. I completely freaked out and decided it was time to go back home. We packed our stuff, said our goodbyes, and everyone was really worried about him, but we all felt creeped out. So we just called it a weekend and left. I drove him home, dropped him off, and went home myself. Later that night, we ended up all meeting each other again in a restaurant for a birthday get-together of a common friend. I noticed Andy was himself again, and my other two friends looked really puzzled. So I sat down and asked him, "What the hell happened yesterday, man?" He replied something like, "Oh yeah, my car broke down and Peter here had to pick me up in the middle of the night after the bar." Well, that made no sense, so we all started asking questions and trying to puzzle it all back together. It turns out that Andy had spent Saturday at a bar with a couple of other guys. Supposedly, at the exact same time, he was at the country house with us. When we kept insisting in a kind of panic that that was impossible, multiple people showed us pictures of him at the event. There were pictures of him at this bar. So we all freaked out, and noticing that we weren't joking, Andy freaked out as well. We confirmed through phone history that his phone in fact got my call Saturday morning, but he doesn't remember answering it. After this, the talk continued, but we really couldn't get anywhere, and that was it. As the months passed by, the three of us got really afraid of Andy and who he could be. We still have no idea of who was with us at the house, and Andy has gotten really sick of hearing about this, to the point of getting really mad when the subject comes up. He says the most rational explanation is we all got confused and thought this up. I'm still nervous about that to this day, especially because I dropped him off at his house and saw him enter. Where the hell did fake Andy go? And did he do anything to us while we were all asleep? I'm not a big believer in paranormal things, but I have no other explanations. The House Doppleganger, submitted by user cryinginchurch. This happened when I was about 13 or so. It was summertime and I was on vacation with my parents. We had hit the road and driven quite a ways to visit my older sister who lived across the country. After spending time together and sharing supper, we decided to call it a night. My parents slept in my sister's bedroom and she slept in the neighboring room with her small son. It's important to note a few things at this point. My mother is a round, short woman with very delicate, feminine features. She has round glasses, and that night she went to bed in a long blue nightgown. My sister, on the other hand, is very tall and athletically built, taking after my dad in regards to her facial features. She too has glasses, but unlike my mom, hers were square-shaped. She went to bed in a shorter, orange-striped nightgown. These small but substantial differences are key. Now, since all the bedrooms were full, I was given a blanket and pillow to sleep on the couch with. Of course, like any kid, I watched TV for a few hours well into the night. At around 4 a.m., it dawned on me that we had plans for the next day, so I should try and get some rest. After tossing and turning for about an hour or so, I gave up and I just laid on my back staring at the stars visible from the nearby window. As the natural light flooded into the room from the sun rising, I flipped through some photo albums. I did this for a while, not having slept at all the entire night. At this point, I was feeling pretty bored and lonely and hoped someone would wake up soon and talk to me. Around 8 a.m., I heard a door slowly open and someone come into the hallway. At my sister's house, the living room is sunken in, and a small staircase of about 3 steps leads to a raised kitchen and dining room. The hallway is also in this raised area and connects to the bathroom and bedrooms. In the living room, there is a doorless archway that leads down to the basement and laundry room. This means that I could look up and see what was going on in the dining area from the couch. The person that came out of the door hummed a little, and then was caught off guard by a table in the dining room full of framed pictures of family my sister had on display. I don't know how to describe the way they looked at the photos besides saying that they were bewildered by them. Maybe even enchanted, letting out an occasional, "Oh," and "Ah." I could tell it was a woman, but I wasn't sure if it was my mother or sister. This was strange because, like I said, they looked alike, but were very distinguishable from one another. I also felt a strange feeling because everyone in my family had seen these photos many times, and we even own a few copies of the exact same pictures. So why act amazed by them? I said, Hey, Ma? What are you doing? In a nervous yet warm voice. No responses. Okay, then it was my sister. Hey, good morning, sis. What are you making your dear sibling for breakfast? No responses. Huh. I knew I was definitely loud enough. They had heard me for sure. That uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger now, and I had no idea why. The likeliness of my sister and mother was there, so it wasn't like a stranger or something. Then I noticed something very off. They were wearing a knee-length blue and orange striped nightgown. Their height wasn't short, but it wasn't tall either. It was average. They had a muscular build, but could not be called skinny either. The hair was the same color as both my sister and mother, and so was the skin color. My heart skipped a beat, and I thought, who the hell is this? Maybe someone stayed overnight? But how could they have? When they turned around and went to inspect another photograph on a wall near the staircase, their face made my heart sink. It was a hybrid of my mother and sister's most discernible features, with glasses that were round at the bottom but squared on the top. Their eyes were not my mother's or my sister's. They were very wide and unnerving, and darted all around the walls very quickly, very excitedly. It was as if my mother and sister had been Frankensteined together into one person. My knee-jerk reaction after seeing their face was to scooch my legs in and pretend I was sleeping. I could feel the veins in my neck beating very hard and my breathing became loud and labored. Whoever this was, or whatever it was, came down the stairs and looked around the living room with that same excitement. I can't even explain how scared I was as it came closer to me. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet, it would pass by me. I was also scratching and pinching myself now in case I was asleep without realizing it. The pain was very real. I was awake. This thing I watched with my eyes squinted took an interest in the photo album I had left on the table, very close to me. Then, probably the worst thing that could have happened. My sister's portable home phone rang. She had answered a call earlier in the night and had put the phone on the couch's frame between the wall and its cushions. This thing's face became very alarmed, and it turned in my direction and saw me and became very, very angry. I opened my eyes and looked at her in her face, and just stared back, with my entire body trembling. Its eyes were pure black, total darkness, like two huge pupils staring right at me, and furious. It opened its mouth unnaturally wide and screamed "No" at me, then turned and darted down the stairs to the basement, where I heard a door slam shut as it kept yelling, "No, no, no!" I stared at that archway for a long time, still shaking and digging my nails into my arm, begging to wake up because I was so afraid it would come back, and I was wishing so hard that I was just dreaming. I literally could not move because I was too scared to get up in case it came back or was waiting at the arch, and I could not speak for that reason. An hour must have passed like that. I did not move. It had stopped yelling, and this was for some reason even scarier than when it had been yelling, because at least then I was sure it was downstairs and not slowly climbing back up the stairs. I heard a door open again from the hallway upstairs and stared at it, full of adrenaline at this point. It was my mom, exactly herself and in the right nightgown. She was humming as she put on coffee and started making toast. Another door opened, my sister this time, fully as she had looked before heading off to bed. She and my mom talked for a bit, and I just stared at them. I decided against my better judgment to tell them what had happened, in case it came upstairs to hurt them. They pretty much just laughed at me and told me I must have just fallen asleep and imagined it. My sister told me to go to sleep with my nephew and asked me to try to fix the screen in her room, as it had somehow fallen out of the window onto the floor the night before. On my way to the room, I walked by that table in the dining room and noticed all the frames were moved and in different places. I kept pressing the issue, so my sister, much to my hysterical protest, Went to the basement in every room just to make me shut up about it, and she didn't see anything unusual at all. I laid in the bed and did not sleep a wink. I still think about it from time to time and did not ever sleep on that couch again, opting instead to sleep on the floor in the room my parents were in and locking the door. I've been questioning reality ever since. The Voice from the Wood, submitted by user OgreAoH. My folks and I lived right at the edge of a fairly big national forest. The back 4 acres or so of our property was fenced in so the dogs could run, but they constantly found ways out and we had to patch holes or fill in digs. This had been going on for months and was just a part of life now. One night, I was getting home fairly late, and as I got out of my car, my pappy hollered from somewhere in the woods along the fence, "Hey, since you're home, can you come out and give me a hand?" The person I was on the phone with heard him and said they'd better let me go since it sounded like I had a fence to fix. I hollered back that I was going to set my stuff in the house and I'd be right there. When I opened the door to set my stuff down, Pappy was sound asleep in the recliner in the living room. As soon as I saw him, every hair on me stood on end. I practically dove inside, shut the door, and slammed the deadbolt home like I was trying to drive it into the doorframe. I don't know what was calling me from the woods, but it definitely wasn't my dad. Who was I really talking to? Submitted by user CountessDashh. This happened to me back in 2011. I was 20 years old and living with my grandpa and sister. My grandpa was in the hospital at the time, and during the week he was away, a lot of weird things would happen at the house. So my sister and I would sleep in the living room. One night, my sister went out with her friends and left me alone at home. It was around midnight, and I decided to get some sleep since I had an early class the next morning. I'm afraid of the dark and can't fall asleep without some sort of light, so I left the bathroom and kitchen light on. In my house, it was enough to partially illuminate the living room. Well, I'm on the couch trying to fall asleep, and as I'm laying there, I hear keys in the door. The front door opens, and in walks my mom, or at least the silhouette of my mom. I was surprised to see her because it was so late, and my mom lives about 30 miles outside the city. I asked her what she was doing there, and she told me she was going to spend the night and go to work from there in the morning. She sounded super irritated, and when I thought back about it, I couldn't see her face, only the outline of her body and her curly hair. Without my glasses or contacts, my vision sucks pretty badly, and it was someone dark in the living room. Anyways, she tells me she's going to shower and walks down the hall and closes the bathroom door. I was thinking, kind of random, but whatever. I look at my phone and it's 1 a.m, so I decide to try to get some sleep for real and manage to. Some time passes and I end up jolting awake from my sleep with an overwhelming sense of dread. I notice the door to the bathroom is still closed, and I call out to my mom, but get no answer. I go to the bathroom and open the door, but the room is empty. Getting even more creeped out, I search the entire house, calling out for her, until I realize I'm all alone. At this point, I start crying because I'm just too freaked out, so I call my sister and I ask her where she is. Thankfully, she had just pulled up and was talking to her friend on the driveway. When she came inside, I told her what had happened, and she was weirded out. I looked at my phone, and it's a little after 2:30 in the morning, so I forced myself to calm down and go back to sleep. The next morning, I called my mom and asked if she had come over the night before. She sounds confused because she was at her house the entire night. This was the weirdest and creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I know I wasn't dreaming and was actually awake when I was talking to this thing posing as my mom. But who was I talking to? The Baby Monitor, submitted by user WarningImBroken. This happened about 4 years ago. It wasn't the first paranormal occurrence to happen in this house, just the one that scared me the most. One night, my 2.5-year-old son woke my husband and I up when he crawled into our bed. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I decided to work on a project in my craft room. I was in there for about 45 minutes when the small monitor to the nanny cam started rapidly flickering on and off. The cameras are in the living room and our son's room. I went over to the monitor and picked it up. It all of a sudden made this loud, ear-piercing sound like a mic feedback. It startled me and I dropped the monitor face down. I noticed that the glow around the edges had stopped flickering. I picked up the monitor and turned to look at the screen, when I saw my son standing as still as a statue in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall. I started to head for the door with the monitor still in my hands, when I glanced down again. My son's head turned and his eyes went directly to the camera in the upper corner of the room. He had no expression on his face at all. I left the room and went through the small kitchen and dining room. I rounded the corner to the living room, and it was empty. The door to our bedroom was on the other side, and when I went in, my son was sound asleep in the same position he was in when I left. My husband looked up from his e-reader, and I asked him if he had woken up and gone to the living room. He told me no. I asked my husband if he had gone to the bathroom or kitchen, thinking maybe he just hadn't seen our son try to follow him. But my husband swears he hadn't left the bed at all, and our son had been peacefully snoring beside him the whole time. Like I said, this wasn't the first time we had seen doppelgangers, but it was always so brief that you didn't really get a chance to get scared or have it completely register. This was different. It wasn't just a glimpse. Above all, it was the look on my son's face, that empty void stare when he turned his head and faced the camera, that still gives me the chills. And that's all for this episode. After hearing these stories, are you as creeped out by mimics and doppelgangers as I am? Have you ever encountered a doppelganger or mimic in your life? I'd love to hear your thoughts or stories. Thank you for listening. I'd also like to ask, if you get a chance, to please rate and review the podcast on your preferred podcast provider, as it goes a long way. In the meantime, if you're looking for more scary stories, don't forget to check out the YouTube channel. I hope all you ghouls and ghosts stay safe, and I'll see you next time.